Hello, and welcome to our next NAP. NAP stands for Nonprofit Auditor Points, and I'm your nonprofit auditor. My name is Irina Oishkova, and I'm nonprofit CPA auditor. I have a small CPA firm here in downtown Oakland where we serve nonprofit organizations. I started my career many years ago at Deloitte & Touche, and I serve nonprofit community, and I realize there is a lot of misunderstanding, misinformation, and lack of information for nonprofit executive directors, board members, finance and accounting personnel to understand sufficiently accounting, auditing, finance, and governing rules. Therefore, I created these NAPs in hopes that some nonprofits will find them useful. To remind you that these videos are not authoritative, I do not represent any government or private institutions. I'm just Irina Oishkova, CPA in California, who shares my knowledge and experience. If your nonprofit have any specific questions, I will advise you to contact your CPA, your tax preparer, your legal counsel, or your board members for questions. Thank you. Let's start. And today I want to continue talking about the board of directors. Board of directors is a governing body. It's the highest body inside any nonprofit. And each board member has a lot of privilege, but also a lot of duties and responsibilities that come with that privilege. And each board member need to understand its duties and responsibility before they become a board member and start governing. As we discussed in the previous videos, each board member personally and collectively responsible overseeing the success of the and mission of the nonprofit organization. Board members and the board collectively is not responsible for day-to-day operations. That's a job of executive director and staff of nonprofit. However, board of directors are responsible for developing overall mission, vision, strategies, and making important decisions for that not day-to-day operations. Let's discuss each responsibility that board member has. And today we will be discussing duty of care. It's a legal term that each board member needs to understand. Board members have to act in a good faith with the care of the ordinary person that would be exercised in a manner that they believe in the best interest of nonprofits. I do believe if each board member, every time when they make any decision, will ask themselves, is it in the best interest of nonprofit? Do I really follow the interest of nonprofits and not my personal interest and my own ego and my own just desire to be right? That will elevate a lot of problems that some nonprofits face. Duty of care is the fundamental fiduciary responsibility of each board member. Essentially, this duty ensures that the board member actively engaged in a governing role. That in order to do that, the board member needs to be well informed about the organization's operations, making objective decisions that align with mission and legal obligations of nonprofit organizations. It's important for each board member to remember that nonprofits are typically funded by taxpayers' money or by overall donors, public. And they are elected as a board member to oversee that each dollar that comes from donors, tax via government agencies that collect taxpayers' funds, or specifically from public foundations, from individual donors, from corporations. They all public donations. And each board member actions decisions how to use these funds in the best possible interest of the public that supports that nonprofit. And that's a duty of care. How each board member can make sure that they do realize their duty of care. Duty of care is just a summary of the duty, but it includes several important factors. Number one, in order to realize the duty of care, each board member have to actively participate as a board member. Why? Because without participation, board member cannot be informed about the matters that nonprofit facing. Participation on the meetings board and individual committees are critical for the board member to be informed, contribute to decision making, and actively participate in deliberations. As we discussed before, good decision making arrived in the critical thinking process where each board member needs to be engaged. When the board member does not attend meetings regularly or adequately prepares for the meetings, the board member cannot fulfill its responsibility of due care. So typical violation of duty of care when the board member skips critical budget meetings and does not review board meetings, minutes of the board of directors, do not ask follow-up questions. It can be jeopardizing nonprofit operations. Another aspect of duty of care, it's informed decision making. The board members cannot act on the feelings. They cannot act on their belief system. They need to make informed decision making, objectively well decision making process needs to be present. Therefore, for the board member to do that, they need to educate themselves about the organization activities, about the finances and strategic challenges in which nonprofit operates. That's absolutely critical. And in order to do that, board members need to be proactive. They need to ask questions from from other board members, from executive direction, seeking expert advices. They can contact the auditor, they can contact their pension plan holder, payroll provider. They need to review financial statements. They need to understand the organization's policies and procedures and contracts. As an auditor, sometimes I'm contacted by the board member who would ask me, is it okay that we, as a board, I've been asking to see some reconciliation of credit cards and I cannot obtain them because executive director does not want to share this information. My answer, it's not okay. You as a governing board body member have absolutely right to see what is your reconciliation process is, to see if the credit cards get reconciled properly, and if you as a board member have concern, then you can bring that up to the board members and say we need to establish a new policy and procedures about reconciliation of credit cards. This is direct fiduciary duty, a duty of care of the board member. Continue asking questions and be well informed. Another very typical violation of duty of care when boards get together very quickly without reviewing appropriately documents and they just approve a very critical document which will influence future performance of nonprofit. For example, maybe signing engagement letter with a third party vendor, that it's very expensive and it's going to influence nonprofit for many years. Or if executive director signs some agency agreement with the related nonprofit without consulting with the board members, and the board members just vote saying, we do know that executive director probably acts in the best interest of nonprofit and we're okay with that. That would be violation of duty of care. That strategic, important decision needs to be done collectively by board of directors, analyzing the agreement that nonprofit will be signing, have a very detailed discussion, analyzing different viewpoint of each board member, and then making a decision whether to sign this agreement or not. Another aspect of duty of care is oversight and monitoring. Board members might have to oversight nonprofit operations. Oversight does not mean participate in day-to-day operations. However, some small nonprofit organizations do not have sufficient staff. They might actually be part of day-to-day operations. But if your nonprofit is large enough and has executive director and staff that are responsible for day-to-day operations, then board members still have to be responsible for oversight. What it means, they need to make sure that the organization's in compliance with applicable law, regulations, and critically, internal policies. Sometimes, again, I contacted with a board member who would say, is it okay that some specific board members travel and stay in luxurious hotels, and other board members don't feel it right and they stay in reasonable hotels for the conferences or other needs? And what is allowed, what is not allowed, and what is allowed for travel purposes would be defined in internal policy and procedures of each specific nonprofit. Who is responsible for that? Board of directors. Board of directors, as a governing body, have to develop their own policy and procedure, what they believe is reasonable, prudent for the board member to do, and what is not reasonably and prudent, and documented in the policies and procedures. As we discussed before, policy and procedures do not need to be super sophisticated. They can simply address the questions that come into mind and in reality and position themselves to be resolved. For example, if nonprofit has some conference and the folks are traveling in a conference, incur some expenses as a result of that travel, some issues arrived, it may be a good idea to revisit your travel policy and update it. Say what budget or what type of hotels board members can stay, what expenses they can spend, and what report that they have to provide at the end of the trip. And again, if you're not sure what should be reasonable, prudent, please remember, each board member have to act in the best interest of the nonprofit. In the best interest of the nonprofit. I highly doubt that the board members can conclude that staying in luxurious hotels for the conference, it's in the best interest of the nonprofit. Please remember that nonprofits do spend money of the taxpayers and donors. And if board members became members in order to serve nonprofit, to improve and mission of the nonprofit and see nonprofit succeed in the mission and serving public, staying in luxurious hotels most likely not will not serve that purpose. So if creating policy and procedures, each board member will remember that they have to use their duty of care, meaning that they have to act in the best interest of nonprofits. They will do well in drafting those policies and procedures. And they have to be governed by the policy and procedures. The governing body, board of directors, has a lot of abilities to create the law and regulations that govern nonprofit. They have to utilize that power, but remember their duties. Another aspect of duty of care is prudent management of resources. And it kind of goes hand in hand with the travel policy that we discuss. Duty of care requires board members to manage nonprofit assets responsibly, ensuring that financial resources are used effectively and aligns with the mission of nonprofit. It's hard to remember, but it's absolutely imperative for the board member remember that volunteering work that they do is wonderful, and they donate their time with only one goal: to help nonprofit to succeed in its mission. Therefore, board has to make sure that they do realistic budgets and they do review their financial statements regularly. As an auditor, I've seen very often that there is special reports prepared for the board members, and some numbers are eliminated, or some numbers are lump summed, or some numbers provided in a way that nonprofit board members can digest and be happy with the information. And that's not a proper way to treat board members. If the board members cannot understand financial information, the budget, it's responsibility of the executive director, of the finance consulting, and the board members to educate themselves to understand true and correct financial representation of nonprofit. It would be violation when the nonprofit is failing to ask questions of significant discrepancy of nonprofit financials. It would be violation if there is some embezzlement or awareness of embezzlement going on within nonprofit and board members do not ask questions because they're uncomfortable. In my personal experience, I've seen embezzlement inside the nonprofit taking places and the board participating initially, but then the results of the embezzlement, nobody knew what happened with the person who embezzled, what was the result of the embezzlement, what was the total amount of embezzlement, because it was uncomfortable conversations, and executive director convinced the board members that everything is under control, and the board members stopped asking. So that would be violation of duty of care. Board members cannot perform their functions if they are not informed, but the information can be received only through inquiries, deliberations, and collective decision-making. Also, I want to give some additional examples where the board members absolutely have to get involved in order to exercise their duty of care. As we mentioned before, board members cannot serve their duty of care without attending meetings. They need to participate in decision-making, be informed about activities. For that, they have to attend meetings. Therefore, if you thinking to become a board member, think if you can participate, if you can attend. Also, some board members can decide that they do not have some expertise. So therefore, they don't need to do anything in reviewing Form 990 audit reports or budgets because they're not finance people. They don't have a knowledge. If your nonprofit does not have specifically designated personnel committees that do that work, then you as a board member have to educate yourself well enough so you can review Form 990, which is tax filing. I'm sorry. You have to review audit reports and you have to be able to review budget. Because if your nonprofit will fail filing Form 990, you will file incorrect audit report, your nonprofit might be audited by the IRS and other organizations, and that can result in loss in any penalties to nonprofit organization. Also, another example, what we see when there is nonprofit board members ignoring conflict of interest in policies. Sometimes board members can vote to hire specific vendors without disclosing that there is a conflict of interest. If I'm a board member and board approving the contract of working with my firm, there's a conflict of interests. Board members should ask uncomfortable questions and not ignoring them. If there is a potential related party transactions, they have to ask. I also, very often in my practice, I've seen that board members rely too much on executive director confirmation that everything is under control, that this contract is good because executive director have done some work, and it's easy for the board members to say it's okay then, and that would be violation. Another violation would be act on the red flags. As an auditor, I am contacted very often with the board members that cannot put a finger on something, but they do feel that something is not right. And red flags would be, for example, there is executive director meets with one specific board member all the time and discussing very important issues, and they make any decision and trying to convince the board members that it's okay without even allowing the rest of the board members to vote on it. Another example would be the board member believes they've been asking for for specific information. For example, can you please provide me the bank reconciliations or credit card reconciliations, but no one providing it to the board member. Board member keep asking, what is our policy on the reimbursement of the president of the board of directors, and nobody provides it. In order for the board member to do its job as a board of directors, as a member of the board of directors correctly, the board member needs to exercise duty of care. In order to exercise a duty of care, board member needs to be informed. And that's the basis for anything that board member is doing. So if we're going to remember, all of us collectively, that board members needs to be informed and making an informed decision collectively, each board of directors will be effective, efficient, and helping nonprofit to move forward with its mission. Thank you so much for being here with me, and please join me for future naps where we're going to discuss other duties of the board of directors. Thank you and have a wonderful day.